Hey everyone, welcome back. In the previous episode we took a look at views and razor pages, primarily at the routing, how they interact with each other, and how to pass data from your C# code into the view part of the application. Today we're going to take steps into implementing the rest of our voting functionality in the UI and add any other stuff that we have left out during our initial stages of development. So let's go ahead and get started. So far we have used if we take a look in our startup, now program.cs, we have started with using iVoting poll factory and the voting poll factory. One of the services that consumes this service is the service that is going to create a voting poll. So that was the voting poll interactor, okay? And this is where we create the voting. So let's go ahead and add this voting poll interactor. So we're going to copy the class name, we're going to go into startup, we're going to go into services, and we're going to add scoped. And the reason for scoped is because this is also going to consume the system persistence layer, and this is going to have a database, okay? And since it's using the app Dbcontext, Entity Frameworks middleware will register the app Dbcontext as scoped. So any service that is going to be consuming app Dbcontext can't be registered as scoped. It can be registered as transient at most or scope, okay? So this is why when we're also going to add the iVoting system persistence layer into our application. So let's go into services and we're going to add scope, and here we're going to provide our interface, and we will also have to give an implementation for this interface. Okay, so the implementation lives in voting system.database. Okay, and we're going to grab this type, and again I'm going to close program so I don't get confused too much. We're going to provide the implementation for this interface, and we are lacking a few references. Now, what I want to do is actually move this voting system persistence interface down into voting system. And the reason for this you will see in a sec, because right now we have the voting system being consumed by voting system.application. So if I double click on it, I can see the reference right here. If I then go into voting system.database, it is then consuming the application layer, right? So the database is meant to be plugged into the application layer. It's not meant to consume the application layer, right? It's like a Lego piece. We should be able to pick it off and put it back on, right? And since we have the database at the moment stuck around the application layer instead of like sort of injected into it, it will be hard to replace it in the future, and it's bad design, right? So this is what we're going to do. We're going to grab this iVoting system persistence, we're going to cut it, so Ctrl X, I'm going to expand voting system, I'm going to paste it in here. I'm then going to double click on it, and I'm going to go ahead and change the namespace, and I'm going to save this. I'll close this, and what I will do in my database project now is I will right click on dependencies and I'll go to add reference. In the add reference, I will now untick the application layer and I will just tick the voting system, okay? And press OK here. Let's go ahead and go into our startup for now and uncomment these two parts, okay? Since I just want to make sure that everything is building and running, since I'm doing this a little bit of refactoring here. Okay, so I have a couple of errors here. I can see that there is no longer reference to voting system.application. Okay, so let's go ahead and remove this. And I'm getting a feeling the second error will be around the same part. Yeah, so voting system.application isn't no longer a namespace that we're going to be using within the database and the database test project, right? So let's go ahead and close these, and we'll close the application.cs project and voting system.persistence. Yeah, we can close this as well. And voting poll interactor, we can close this. Now let's go ahead again, uncomment this, and at the moment we won't build because we haven't imported the packages that these two live in. So now what happens is the voting system is the real root, okay? And from this root, we're gonna have the application layer sprout. So this is how we orchestrate the data and how we play around the saving it to the database, okay? And then the second route is the database layer. This is how we persist this data in the database. You can also have a voting system file project where, let's say, you will implement another voting system persistence interface, but it will be something like voting system file persistence, okay? And then all you will have to do is re-import that project, and like a package, just switch out one piece and the rest should work, okay? So what we're doing here is when we're defining the interface in the voting system, the iVoting system persistence, we're programming against this interface in voting system.application, and then we're implementing a voting system.database. This is called dependency inversion, okay? And then what we're gonna do in our voting system.ui, we're gonna right click, add dependencies, and we're gonna go ahead and add both the database and the application. We no longer need the voting system since we're gonna get it from these two projects. Let's click OK. And from here point on, let's go ahead and try to import these two. So voting system persistence, we got that, and voting poll interact. Good stuff. Let's go ahead and build everything. Okay, so it seems like we have all the services that we need for the voting poll interactor to run. We have the voting poll factory, which we register here before that, and we have the voting system persistence, which we will need to persist this database, right? So another thing that we'll need is for our voting system persistence is that we're actually injecting the app Dbcontext. So we have to register entity framework. Okay, so what we'll have to do is go into our startup. Again, I'll close these two files. And let's actually clean up a little bit before we go in. I'm going to delete the custom middleware. I'm going to delete this unneeded stuff that we accumulated in our startup.cs. Okay. So now that we've cleaned up, let's go ahead and add a service that will register our entity framework Dbcontext and inject it into the voting system persistence. For this, we'll need to go into services and we will need to add a Dbcontext. And this is a way that you can remember this, right? We have a Dbcontext, our app Dbcontext inherits from Dbcontext, and this is what we're going to be adding. We're going to be adding a database context, okay? And usually you didn't see it here, but add Dbcontext, there it is, you will get IntelliSense from it, okay? And we are going to have to supply the type of our Dbcontext, right? So app Dbcontext, if we F12 on app Dbcontext, you can see that it accepts a type of tcontext, and if I expand this real quick and go to the end, you will see where it says here where tcontext has to inherit from Dbcontext. Okay, so it is a generic type. It will accept a type as long as it's inheriting from Dbcontext. Okay, so we got our Dbcontext. Now what we want to do is similar to how we did it in our test project, how we have to specify a provider. Where are we going to be storing this data? In memory, in SQL, etc. For now, I will just opt in for the in-memory provider again, but usually this is where you want to start hooking up to the SQL database. Okay, so the way you do it is you specify options here, and then this is going to be an action at this point. So if I go to app Dbcontext, I'll scroll over, I will see that it accepts an action of Dbcontext options builder. Now the Dbcontext options builder should be familiar to you from the entity frameworks basics tutorial, right, where we use the Dbcontext builder to actually add our provider, and we're going to do exactly the same thing here. Okay, we're going to go into options and we're going to say use in-memory provider, but obviously we don't have it, so let's go ahead and quickly snatch it up from our EF Core Sandbox project. We'll grab it from here, we'll double click on our UI, and later on we will add the normal SQL database store. Okay, so one thing is I actually want to create a different item group for this. So let's create an item group where we're going to put our package reference, right? We don't want to store them with our project references, we want to keep them separate, right? So keep things neat. So once we got that, let's go back into our startup, and again we will grab use in memory database. Okay, and alt enter, use entity framework core, there it is, and now all we have to do is specify a name. So I'm going to say database. Okay, and one thing is, for everybody who doesn't understand how the action works, it's essentially if I would have created a function right here that will say public void add Dbcontext, and I will supply an action, or rather not supply an action here, this is the action. Okay, and what this action wants you to have is a parameter that you supply, right? So it's not a function. Functions return something, so void doesn't return anything, it is a action, or otherwise referred to as a method. Here now we're going to supply a parameter of Dbcontext options builder. Let's go ahead and name it options builder. Okay, and since this is going to be a reference type, all we're gonna do is, let's say, grab this, put this here, grab the options builder, and build our options in here, right? So we're passing a reference type into a function, and this is what's going to happen here. This service function is going to provide the Dbcontext option builder, and it's going to push it into this function, and then after we have configured the builder, it's going to build the options similar to how we do it in our test project. So if we go to our database tests and infrastructure Dbcontext factory, you can see how we build the options by grabbing the options object, but we still provide our use in memory database. So all that's going to happen is this function will instantiate a new Dbcontext option builder of the type that we have specified right here. It will put it into this function function. Whatever actions we define in this lambda right here, we can go even as far as just saying, right, let's put this function right here because it's an action, and that will work. Put this option builder, right, it's going to instantiate a new options builder into this function. Whatever commands we do, execute on it after this function has executed, or whatever function we specify here, go ahead and grab the options after this function has run. Okay, so we don't need to go that far. This is just for anybody who is confused about the functional programming paradigms of C#. Okay, so this is just a function parameter which is then going to be used to instantiate the options. Okay, and then they're going to be passed into the constructor right here. So hopefully that wasn't too long of a tangent there. Now we have our app Dbcontext. We are using the in-memory database. Let's go ahead and use one of our pages that we have created to use the voting poll interactor rather than the voting poll factory to create our voting poll. Okay, so all we will have to do is go into our index.cshtml.cs as the backend. We're still going to be using the same form. You can also rename this class form. I'll keep it as a request, and instead of the iVoting poll interactor, what I will do is I will inject the voting poll interactor. And sorry, not iVoting poll interactor, iVoting poll factory, right? But anyway, I'm going to be injecting the voting poll interactor, grabbing the reference, and then making sure it's named appropriately. So voting poll interactor, let's go ahead and replace the poll factory with the voting poll interactor. And here we're going to call create voting poll, and the request is still going to be the same. However, this is now void. So let's go ahead and remove this poll. This is going to be purely for creational purposes. Okay, so let's go ahead and delete the onGet as well. And what we end up with is this neat little page where we just display the page, we have our form, and then we pass it on to the function, which is going to create our voting poll and save it in the database. Now what we're going to need is to actually display all of our voting polls that we're going to create. What we're doing with our statistics interactor is we're getting all the details about a particular voting poll. And voting interactor is about voting on that voting poll. We're not actually displaying a list of voting polls that you can select from to choose to vote for, right? So what I'm going to opt into is, since it's just going to be a simple select from a database, what you can do is you can implement your own interactor with a function or a method on the voting system persistence interface and do it in a test-driven development way. What I'm going to opt into is just a simple quick fix of injecting the app Dbcontext into here. So I'll press Alt Enter using voting system database. I'm gonna not forget to put from services on here, and I will grab the CTX and put it here. Now some people might frown a little bit here, like what's the point of this whole architectural thing if then we're just gonna break all our principles and inject the Dbcontext straight into UI rather than rely on the interactor. Now the thing with small applications is that it's okay to break the rules sometimes. Okay, you're only going to retrieve the voting polls to display them in a list once on one page. That's okay to inject the app Dbcontext. Okay, if you're then going to be using that functionality, you need to make a conscious decision, right? I can no longer be injecting my app Dbcontext. I need to create an interactor and keep reusing that functionality. Okay, but here an app Dbcontext will do. Now what we're going to need is to extract the IDs and names of the voting polls, right? And maybe the description if you want to get fancy. But let's go ahead into our context. We want to go for our voting polls and we want to select all our voting polls. Okay, so let's go ahead and to list them. So we're going to convert them to a list. We're going to select everything. So we have all of our voting polls, but remember that our voting polls don't have the ID field on them, right? So we want to map them to an object that has field, ID, and name. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a public class inside this index model since it's only going to be displayed here. I'm also going to show you how to organize your Razor pages, but just follow along for now. So let's say public class voting poll VM, right? So vModel, this is what we're going to be displaying, and let's go ahead and just say int ID and another one string name. Now we want to convert our voting polls into this voting poll VM, and we've already done a hard part. You can pause the video here and go off the example that we have done here. Hint, hint, you're gonna need a select statement, and if you remember how to use the property, go ahead and do it. Otherwise, you can go ahead and watch me do it. But anyway, let's go ahead and write this. So what we're gonna need is a select statement. So let's go ahead and do select. Let's grab the X for the voting poll. I'm gonna select a new voting poll. Okay, and in here I'm gonna go ahead and supply my properties, and I actually messed this up already. So voting poll, let's change this to voting poll VM, and I wanna assign to my ID. I'll grab it from EF. I will have to import this using namespace Microsoft Entity Framework Core. I'll grab the property. It will have to be an integer. I will have to grab it from the X, and the property name will be ID, right? Super simple. Let's go ahead and also grab the name from the X. It's the title. So what I will actually do is I will go to the name here, press Ctrl R twice, and I'll rename this to title. Okay, and now just to clean this up a little bit, now what I want to do is I want to display this voting poll on the view. So if you remember, how to get our data onto the view is through accessing this model. So what I'll have to do is go to model and look for my voting polls. Oh, look, they're not there, right? So let's go ahead back into here and let's say, right, voting polls, what are they going to be? It's probably going to be a list of voting polls. That was the initial idea. I want to display a bunch of voting polls and navigate to those. Okay, so let's go ahead and say public. How do we create a collection? So it's going to be an I collection. Let's go ahead and not bring it up just yet because it's going to bring in the wrong thing if we don't specify a generic type. Let's go ahead and bring this one in, and let's say voting polls, right? So these are our voting polls. It's a collection of voting polls which we seed on when we enter the page, and of course we need to assign this here. So we have our voting polls. Let's go ahead and display them. I'll leave the form as is. I'm not going to be showing the JavaScript part for this. I think that's something else, something you can learn on your own. I'm just going to go ahead and display a bunch of links for each of my voting polls. So let's go ahead and create a for each loop. I'll say poll in voting polls, and let's go ahead and say the link name. We'll specify the poll title, and then we want to give the href, and we're going to be using something similar to generating attributes on an input field, but we're going to be generating attributes on the link. All right, so again, you're going to get a little bit of IntelliSense with your HTML generation. So we have the name. The way we're going to orientate which voting poll we're going to be getting is by the voting poll ID. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a page where we can use our statistics interactor and the voting interactor. I'm going to press Ctrl Shift A, and I'm going to go for a new Razor page, and we'll call it poll, right? So we're going to navigate to a poll to vote for it. So it's going to be a voting poll. Let's go ahead and add. So now that we're on the voting poll, I'm going to go ahead and say, right, we should not be able to reach this page unless we have a voting poll ID. Okay, so this is where I'm going to say this route should only be valid with an ID. So I'm not going to specify it as an optional parameter. I'm going to say that it's going to be part of the route, right? So now what I will need to do is on my poll, on the onGet method, I want to actually accept this ID here. So it will be populated. And this is then how I can get the statistics of the voting poll. So let's go ahead and grab our statistics from services. So it was statistics interactor. You can go ahead, press on the file, press F2 to try rename it, and it's going to just select the name of this class. So we can control copy this, and it's an easy way to grab your class names. Sometimes you can just open your Solution Explorer with Control Alt L, press F2, or click on whatever class you need, press F2, copy, and paste it in, right? So nice little trick. Let's go ahead and call this interactor. You can give it a more meaningful name if you're feeling like it, but I'm going to go ahead and stick with interactor. I'm going to grab my voting system.application namespace. And let's go ahead and what do I need here? Interactor, get statistics, and all I need is the poll ID. Okay, so let's go ahead and pass our ID. What does this actually return? It's going to return a poll statistics class. Okay, so let's go ahead and make a poll statistics. Let's go ahead and store it somewhere, right? Statistics. Let's actually just call it statistics, right? We're already on the poll page. It kind of makes sense that these statistics are going to be for the poll. So we assigned it to a variable in this scope. So what this means is that if we try to go to the poll page and at the model here, we can't actually reach our statistics, even if it's lowercase, right? Our statistics isn't reachable. So let's go ahead and make it a property on the poll model class. So here it is, public poll statistics. Let's go ahead and remove the private set. It's not really needed. So now what we can do in here is basically reach our statistics and say, oh, we can actually display some information about it. So let's go ahead, stick the title in header 1. We will grab the description and we will stick it in, let's say, header 2. The description should be slightly smaller than the big description, right? Let's put them all in a div. I feel like my Razor file isn't being formatted properly for some reason. I'm not sure. It's not a big problem. Let's go ahead and create a for each loop, right? So we're gonna have a bunch of counters, right? And we want to grab each individual counter and we want to display this information, right? So we're gonna grab our model. I went a little bit too fast for the counters, so let's grab our statistics. Let's grab the counters, and now we're gonna end up with each individual counter. So I'm just gonna go ahead and make a paragraph, 3 times the charm paragraph. Almost made a link there, but there we go. So let's go ahead and create a counter name, counter count, and of course you can get very fancy with this UI, with CSS and all that. This is not what this tutorial is about. This is, again, about building your components separate from the voting system UI when you're learning it, and then just being able to, oh, right, I got these components, let's go ahead and plug them into a UI, right? So, and there's a bunch of different ways that you can build these components and reuse them for different types of UIs. So one thing is, usually what will happen is the statistics interactor, it needs to be a service. So you're gonna forget about this stuff, right? So you're gonna run the application, you're gonna see the error that we have discussed before. So what you need to go do is you need to go into your startup, and again, because it depends on a database, you will need to grab the statistics interactor and add it as a scoped service, okay? Let's go ahead and grab the namespace as well. And at this point, we might as well grab our voting interactor and put it in here as well, right? So voting interactor, right? So for the future, we're gonna need it. Might as well put it here now. At this point on, it was probably worth just running and seeing if it works once we have finished with our index page here, once we have displayed our voting polls. Every time you add a new piece of functionality, you want to run your code and you want to see if it works, right? So you want to run your code as often as possible, not debugging it, because debugging sessions are kind of drilling deep into it. Kind of what you get with test-driven development. You run most of your functionality most of the time, and you know that your program works most of the time, right? So here what you want to do is you want to quickly test if your application works. Okay, so here we are facing an error. Let's see what this is about. It's already saying a bunch of things about dependency injection. So what I can draw from this instantly, it's something wrong with our services, okay? And it's probably something to do with the lifetime. So let's go here and we'll see some services are not able to be constructed. So it's unable to create some services. Error while validating the service descriptor, service type, voting system, .application.statistics interactor. Lifetime scoped implementation type, unable to resolve service for type iCounterManager while attempting to activate statistics interactor. Okay, so the error is pretty clear. We are unable to inject some kind of service into our statistics interactor. It even tells you the lifetime, but at this point it's just noise information. The real error is here. Unable to resolve service for type iCounterManager while attempting to activate statistics interactor, right? So let's go ahead into our statistics interactor. We're going to see the iCounterManager. That's not a service that we have added to our pipeline. Let's go ahead and grab our iCounterManager. Same as the voting poll factory. We're going to create that. And by the way, another sweet little keybind you can use is Ctrl-Tab. So it's only going to put you back to your previous page. So for example, if you're like me, you're going to be like, right, I need to copy the iCounterManager. I'm going to go to add singleton and oh, I don't actually have this, so I need to either do something like copy the iCounterManager, put it here, copy the line, copy the iCounterManager and put it here, right? Or you can copy the line, put it here, Ctrl-Tab to go to the previous page, copy this here, and paste the iCounterManager here, right? So Ctrl-Tab is another sweet little keybind that you can use. Let's go ahead and grab the CounterManager class as well and put this as the implementation for the iCounterManager interface, and now the statistics interactor will be able to use it. So we're ending up with pretty big amount of tabs open, so I'm going to go ahead and close all of them, right? Why not? Let's go ahead and run this again. Now here we are at our form. Let's go ahead and fill it out just like we used to, and what we'll do is we'll just submit it. And it looks like we're getting a null reference exception. Now, a lot of people, they come to me with questions about errors they get and they don't know how to solve them. So if you find yourself in a category where you find it hard how to debug stuff and how to find solutions to errors, you should probably pay close attention. Now, I'll just show you how you can go about figuring out what's wrong, right? So right here, it's saying null reference exception, object reference not set to an instance of an object, okay? And it tells you the line, okay? So something here is null, and most likely what it will be is it will be either the model or the voting poll. It's very unlikely that it's the model because Razor Pages model is set automatically, and it's probably the voting polls. Now, where do we set the voting polls, right? If we go here and we go to our index.cs.cs.html, we're setting the voting polls here. And how we would usually have a class, for example, same as we have our in models voting poll. You see how we have a list of counters and we set it in our constructor? We don't set it here. So from the beginning, it's going to be null, but we are setting it here. So what I want to do is I just want to put a breakpoint here and I want to see what happens. Does it set this value or does it not set this? Okay. So let's go ahead and go here and we're going to press F5. And what this is going to do is resubmit the form. Do I want to account for having another value in my database? Probably not. Let's go ahead and cancel this and let's go ahead and press enter. Okay. So here we're hitting the breakpoint. Let's go ahead and press F10. And before that, what you can actually do is hover over your CTX or even your voting polls and results view. Okay. So it looks like we have our voting poll in the database. So let's go ahead and press F10 once just to reach this end bracket here. And now what we want to do is we want to take a look at the voting polls, right? So it is not null. We can keep pressing F10 to reach the Razor view debugging, and we'll go a few times so we can see that it's extracting it here, right? And it's going to keep going. And now that I've finished debugging the Razor page, what it's doing now is it's hitting the onGet again, right? So this second call is a little bit suspicious. And what we can do is we can find the locals window to look at the request object to see where the request is coming from, right? What is this second request? We want to find out. Or even if the first request was faulty, but very unlikely. But basically, here is what we want to do. You want the locals window, okay? Or the watch window, where you can then type in your variable. So for example, you can find your locals window in the search here and press it, and here you'll have your local variables. And then inside this, you can find your HTTP context and you can find your request. Okay. Also, you can find a watch window and you want the watch 1 or watch 2 or whatever, right? So you grab watch 1, and then here, all you need to do is type in the variable that you want to watch. So for example, it could be the request, and you can see you're getting a little bit of IntelliSense here. So let's go ahead and grab this request and we're just going to take a look at what we have here, right? So the request will have stuff like the path, and you can see that it's the favicon. Okay, so I think I briefly mentioned this in the previous episode or sometime, or maybe even in the Razor Pages episode. You can probably see that the favicon is at the path/favicon, and that's literally matching our onGet route here. So the favicon is hitting this. Could it be causing the problem? Probably, but at this point, it's not proof that it's causing the problem, right? It's just a second request, and we now know that it's the favicon, right? Any weirdness that's going on, you want to find out what it is straight away so you can either discard it or consider it as a problem and then delve deeper, okay? So, we pass this. We get our Razor page rendered, and oh, we do have the title and we no longer get the null reference exception. Okay, let's replay. Let's go ahead and refresh this so we see the network tab here. So for some reason we're in the startup, not sure. Let's go close that. I'll press F5 just to skip this, and here's the second request. So I want to see here that the page gets rendered, and then we get the second favicon.echo, right? So this is what's happening. So you're trying to build a mental image of what's happening. We actually got the request back from the server, and the second request that it's making here is once the page is already loaded in the background, okay? So it's like a phantom request, but the browser makes it automatically, right? So there's not much we can do about it, but there it is. And if we try to take a look at it, the response, we will see that it's, again, our form, right? But it's looking for an image, but that's besides the point. We're no longer seeing the error that we were seeing. So what was the condition? This is another step that you want to make sure that you have nailed down, is being able to reproduce the error. Once the error is occurring, once you know there is an error, you want to be able to reproduce it. So what did we do last time that caused the error? Well, we submitted the form. So let's go ahead and submit the form with the exact same things again. And what we can do is we can place the breakpoint here. We know it did an error because it did save it to the database. We just want to see what's happening here. Okay, so let's go ahead and submit it. We'll press F10 and F10 again. And it looks like we are rendering the page at this point. Let's take a look at the voting polls, and it's null. Okay, so this can give you a hint of that the onPost is returning the index page itself, kind of like the onGet without the return of the page. It just returns the page, right? So at this point, voting polls being null is causing this error. Okay, so again, just to restate, once we hit the onPost, it will then try to re-render the page, and it will go to the index CS_HTML with voting polls being null, because we never set it in the onPost function, right? So let's go ahead and take care of that error. I'm going to press F5, it's going to error, and I'm going to just skip past this point because we're actually getting the favicon. So if we go back here, the page is already loaded, and the page is automatically, the browser is automatically trying to load the favicon, right? So this is what this second request is about, and if we F5 here, there it is. So that second phantom request will occur every time a page load happens, right? The null reference exception right here, that's where it's happening when it's trying to re-render the page. The voting polls isn't there. So let's go ahead and solve this issue. One way that we can solve this is same as in our voting polls, in our voting.system. We can set this to not be null or an empty list, but that's not ideal because we would have to rewrite this query and assign to the voting polls here as well. So let's go ahead and turn this into an IAction result and make sure that we just redirect to the same page after we have submitted our form. So redirect to page, redirect to page, yeah, there we go, and we'll say /index. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this and see what happens now. So we hit it once, we hit it twice for the favicon. We're back here, let's go ahead and fill this out. 3, submit, okay. And now we're going to redirect to the index. So I'm going to press F5 here, and we're redirected to the onGet. This is going to be the first call. The page is loaded, and we still have the second request for the favicon. Okay, and now the crash no longer occurs. So this is how you can find out what's wrong and fix the error. So it's a step-by-step process. You start with reading the error, you look at the line where it occurs, you put a breakpoint there, and then you try to make conclusions by inspecting what's happening step by step. Okay, and also identifying where the error occurs and being able to reproduce the error are keys to solving errors as well. The longer you can look at the problem, the better solution you can come up with. So let's stop this and let's go ahead and resolve this favicon issue. What I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly go into my system.ui and I'm going to create a www root folder since it's a file. And I'm going to create a favicon.eco just to serve it from the root of my www root. And what I want to do is in my startup.cs, just before we start matching any routes, I want to make sure that it tries to look in the static files for whatever it's looking for, right? So use static files and we'll put it here, right? So before we match routes, try to match files. All right, now I'm going to close startup and let's run this. Okay, so here's the first request. I'm happy with that, it's working correctly. And the second request never occurs. And we can actually go take a look at the network, refresh past the breakpoint. Let's take a look at the favicon and you can see that it's X icon. And if we take a look at the request, it's actually nothing there, right? Because the file is actually an empty text file, right? But we can also, let's remove the breakpoints and let's verify that this indeed does work. So fill the form out, submit it. There's our voting poll. Let's go ahead and navigate to it now. Okay, so we have the ID that we're setting on the voting poll VM. Let's go ahead into the page, and on the link we're going to use another tag helpers that comes from this namespace. As other tag helpers, it's going to begin with ASP dash, and here we're going to say we want you to navigate to a page, and we're going to say /poll, because this is what our other page in the pages folder is called, right? So poll, we want to navigate to /poll. But one thing that we're going to be doing on the poll page is we're going to be passing an ID parameter in the route. So let's go ahead into our index.cs HTML, and in here we will say ASP route, and here what you do is you type dash and you specify what parameter it is, right? So here we have named the parameter ID, and you can see that the name of the parameter is ID here as well. What we want to do is we want to say ID, right? So this name matches the parameter that we're passing here and defining here, right? So there's our ID, and let's go ahead and from the poll we'll grab the ID as well. Okay, and let's see what we're doing on our poll. We're grabbing the statistics. Are we displaying the statistics? We are, right? So let's go ahead and see if this works. So we're gonna create this. Let's go to the title. Oh, and it looks like we're hitting an exception, right? So what happens with tests-driven development when you have a suite of tests and you hit an exception in your code that you haven't accounted for in the beginning? What you then go is you go find the test responsible for this and you add a condition that you have just run into, okay? So this was a blank voting poll. So all the counter statistics are going to have a count of 0 and the percentage should be 0 as well, right? So let's go ahead into our voting system application.tests, and actually nope, just voting system.tests because that's where the counter manager lives, right? We're going to go into the counter manager tests, and here we're going to add some conditions. First of all, the get statistics. It didn't really error, but what I want to do is I want to say, right, we actually had 0 votes and this had 0 votes as well, right? So the statistics should be 0 as well. So let's go ahead and run these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for Test Explorer up here. I know the window is over there, but come on, you gotta let me have some fun. Let's go ahead, pin the window. Oh, yep. And run all of our tests. Okay, so it looks like it's failing for, I'd imagine, the test that we have just added. This is not a condition that we have accounted for, right? So what's probably happening is that it's dividing by 0. So what I want to do to make this pass, I'm going to go into the counter statistics and check if the total count is bigger than 0, or rather just like that, do what we were doing before. Otherwise, just add 0. Okay, let's go ahead and rerun all of our tests again, just to make sure that we have not regressed. Okay, and that's passing. So I'm confident with that. Let's go ahead back into our counter manager tests. And now we want to find a test where we can check that it doesn't add excess when all counters are equal. Let's go ahead and change this test, but this time we're going to make sure that we're going to be supplying zeros as well as these 33.33s, right? So let's go ahead and make this a theory, and we're going to say double %, and this is what we're going to be supplying. So let's go ahead, add this here twice and remove the extra parameters. We can actually add this one more time and delete this. We're going to grab the 33 and we're just going to pass it here, and then we're going to replace these 33s with the %. Let's go ahead and run all of our tests. Okay, so it looks like something is failing. Let's go into resolve excess. Doesn't add excess when all counters are equal. So it looks like we are failing an assertion. That's because we haven't actually changed it. So let's go ahead and assign it to the %, right? So the % should stay as it was. Let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so all of our tests are passing. Let's go ahead and run our application again and see if it's working right now. Also gonna drop down this Test Explorer so it doesn't get in the way. Okay, so let's bring this up. Submit, go to here. And here we have it, right? So we don't necessarily display it as the most beautiful thing, but you can see the power of the testing suite, right? Once you have a testing suite set up and you run into the condition that you haven't accounted for before, you can just go ahead and add a test for it real quickly. And then you can be rest assured that your code is going to be still working correctly if it breaks at your logic level for which you have your suite of tests, okay? But for now, I'll cut this episode here because it is getting quite long. So leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to leave a comment if you have any questions or just want to say thank you. Don't forget to join the Discord server as well. I do a lot of announcements there. And as always, I'll see you in the next episode.